Hi everyone and welcome to my Season 28 class ranking. So here I try to cover basically all the important aspects for each of the classes. For example, you see this here on the left, a season start, solo push, solo XP, etc. All the way down to like some overall ranking that I give it at the end. So overall this is fairly similar to what you might be used to already from the max roll tier lists, but those are not out yet. And also here I have the opportunity to give a bit more like extra details, I guess, besides just listing all the builds in a ranking. So I want to talk through some of those points. I want to highlight that I have played and pushed pretty much every single build in this game at some point, and most of the better ones recently or on the PTR again. So I have a pretty good foundation here of background knowledge, and I have also done a lot of leveling practice runs, a lot of season start practice runs lately for each of the classes, actually going, for example, at least until GR 70 from 0, and just getting a bit of a feel of how it will be in the next season for each of them. Obviously, some of these rankings are also based a little bit on gut feeling. For example, this quality of life and difficulty. So I try to kind of like put this together to give people a bit of an understanding of how hard it is to play a class overall, or how like click intense, for example, are the builds, or how much attention do you have to pay to be effective. So there's like these kind of things. And this is obviously a little bit subject to interpretation here. But so much for the intro. Let's get started here. I have ranked all of these classes ranging from S being the best to A, B, C, D, F. So F being the worst in this ranking. So it's like a typical tier list ranking. And I didn't really like put them into like necessarily an order. So I was discussing this and I felt like going like, best like number 1 and then worst number 7 or something like that wouldn't really do all of these builds or all these classes justice, because sometimes there is like 2 really good choices or 2 really bad choices in these kind of things. So I think this makes a bit more sense here to go with the letters instead, to have an understanding of the relative power. In any case, you see the overall ranking here at the bottom. So I have 2 S tier classes. These are Demon Hunter and Necromancers. So those are generally the suggestions that I will give for people. If you are unsure, you should choose one of those 2 classes. But again, pretty much every single class is like really strong this season. Every class can beat 150 relatively comfortably. In fact, almost every single build in the game can do 150 comfortably, or at least on the higher end later in the season. So you don't have to just go by this. If you don't know what I mean, the season theme in Season 28 is extremely powerful. This is probably the strongest season theme we've ever had, maybe even beating the soul shards. And I have this extra line here at the bottom where I just gave like a little estimate of what I would expect to see in the season, even considering that some classes are going to be more and less popular. So the days it will take until someone beats solo 150 on this class. So on the wizard, that will be literally day 1. Necros are so good, they basically start at GR 150. And then you have other classes where I expect Natalia to be quite powerful, but that remains to be seen. This is a bit tentative. And I expect that there will be at least one person on every single class within the first week of the season that will do 150. So obviously it's going to be less on some of these less popular classes, and maybe I'm going to be a bit wrong on some of these. But overall you can tell that the power level is high. You don't really need any paragons for some of those top builds like Meteor. Like it can literally do a Paragon 0 150 as long as you have a bit of gear and you play it well. So this is what we're talking about here. In any case, let's rank the season start. So I have done all my season start practice without challenge with cash. So this means I went the difficult route basically, because at least for the blasters, they will absolutely save the cash to sacrifice in the altar. And this probably skews the balance a little bit between the classes. So some of them will have an easier time starting than others with or without the cash. But Demon Hunter in general is rather weak at leveling, but you get the God Demon Hunter set. And I was doing my practice before the buff, and I didn't know that the buff was actually coming. So I actually had a really good time. It took me 3 hours to reach GR 70, starting from 0 without cash on the live server. To give you a bit of a perspective, the slowest time I had by far was the wizard with 4 hours 45 minutes, but I was also quite unlucky on that one. So if I had gotten some more average luck, it would have probably been around 4 hours. So if you are efficient and not super unlucky, something like 3 to 4 hours could be the time to reach GR 70, and then maybe another 1 or 2 hours until GR 90 farm. So overall, every single class gets one of their better sets, but some just have an easier time leveling and also have an easier time really coming online with their Hades Gift set. So for example, Necromancers, you get Masquerade for Bone Spear, and on the Wizard you get Typhon for Hydra. But both of these builds have like this one really crucial piece that you need to find. And especially in the case of the Necromancer, Haunted Visions is an amulet. There are tons of amulets in the game. You have to upgrade rare until you get it. That can potentially take quite a long time. And if you don't have it, the Bone Spear build will not really pop off. And kind of similar with Hydra. That being said, basically every single class can do at least something like Torment 6, Torment 7 very comfortably as soon as you have the Hades Gift completed. So just the set without anything usually will do at least that. In some cases a bit higher. And then once you start adding those core pieces, which I have like a little bit lined out here and what you should go for first basically, it gets easier and easier and you're going to be in T16 in no time. Without going into too much detail for the season start for each of the classes, in general you can expect a relatively smooth start with this caveat here, Haunted Vision and Serpent Sparker, so go LOD until you get them is my suggestion. But I will also have a video for each of the classes on how I would progress and also just like putting in my experience that I have acquired now from the test runs. So stay tuned for those. Let's get into the solo push. So the best two classes here by a mile, I'd say, are Necro and Wizard. So this is a bit of a question mark still with Natalia. I expect Natalia will be very strong, but I don't think it will be like Nova strong, but that remains to be seen. But yeah, Death Nova and Meteor, those two are the top builds. I already showed it earlier, the days until solo 150. Those two builds will do 150 day one, guaranteed. And I'm not just talking about the group blasters here that will just do a quick solo push. I'm talking about hardcore SSF here. So those builds are simply ridiculous. And if you want to push very high, if you want to do 150 and you've never done it, then those two classes are your choices. In fact, I'm planning to make like a step-by-step guide, very easy to understand how to progress and how to get to 150 and complete it for the first time. If you're like a more casual player, I want to help out everyone who is, still has this goal in mind of maybe doing 150 someday. Now is the time, and Nova is the build. And if you don't like the Nova or you don't have the Necromancer, then Tarasha is also a really, really strong option. So it will be a breeze on both these classes. Then we have the A tier classes for solo push, Demon Hunter and Barb. Again, we're not sure about Natalia. This has to be seen after the patch. I expect it to be at least A tier, probably S tier in terms of overall like comparability to the other classes. This doesn't mean that these classes will not have like an S tier push build like we have it on the Max Roll tier list, for example. But instead, I just try to like give like a distinction between the classes here. So this is why, for example, Witch Doctor has a C, even though Zunimasa is most likely also an S tier pushing build. But I'm going to go into that in a second. So while we don't know much about Natalia yet, we can say for sure that Raker is going to be extremely powerful. Barb in general is a really solid class in my opinion. And if you like the Boulder Toss, then this is going to be a really good solo push option. But keep in mind, this is a quite difficult build to play optimally. It is relatively fishy and these kind of things. But it definitely gets better in Season 28 with the extra toughness and all these kind of things. Then we have the Monk. Wave of Light is actually a really powerful build, but again, this is something that's very difficult to play. It's also very difficult to gear, so I wouldn't really recommend Monk as like a build push class. But that being said, it still remains comfortably one of the best builds in the game. You're also going to see that here in the solo speeds. It is actually the best solo speed build, but I do not recommend it that much for pushing. Crusaders, yeah, they have relatively decent pushing builds with Arcan and Heaven's Fury, but they don't really feel like great anymore. Arcan is Omega laggy, Heaven's Fury got nerfed like 5 times, and it's not going to be like easy peasy 150 solo or something like that. You have to work a little bit for it. And we have the Witch Doctor at the end. Witch Doctor does have decent solo pushing builds. So there is Zuni, number 1, but again has the issue, very difficult, very high end. It will destroy 150 on a higher end, but I do not recommend it. So this is why it gets a C. And we have the other Witch Doctor builds here, Mundunugu, LOD darts, Eric here. They are generally, more comfy, I guess, but also have their own tricky mechanics and also don't really just easily blast through 150. So let's get into the solo speeds. I already talked about the Wave of Light. Wave of Light is, yeah, not like massively better, but probably the best of all the solo speed builds. Again, so if you like to farm a lot of solo XP and you care about the efficiency, then this is the build most likely. That being said, we got this God Demon Hunter buff, we got the UE buff, we got maybe even the new Natalia. So Demon Hunter in general looks really good on that end, really easy as well with God and UE, for example. So if you want to have a bit of build variety or you just don't like the Monk, then definitely just play Demon Hunter. I think this is a really good suggestion here. And in general, we have a lot of classes that are actually fairly close here, in my opinion. So there's like a lot of A's, as you can see. So the Raker and Frenzy are very nice. LOD Bomb, very powerful build. It's probably somewhere in at least the top 5 of all solo speed builds, in my opinion. And we have Meteor as well, which is very strong on the Wizard, although a bit more slow paced. So for XP, this is very good, but for gearing up, not so much. And if you care about getting a lot of primals, for example, these Meteor runs can be relatively slow if you compare to something like God Demon Hunter, but you go like 10 tiers higher or something. I put the Necro on B here. While they have Bone Spear, it's not exactly on the same level as God, neither in like quality of life nor in the power level. So it is a bit behind. There's Rathma, which is actually a very strong solo farming build, but it has kind of the same issue as Meteor. It's rather slow. It's also rather clunky to play, rather difficult to play, rather squishy. So not really a best recommendation here. And we have Witch Doctors. So yeah, Witch Doctors solo farm is going to be noticeably worse than other classes. So that's why it gets the C here. We have Eric here, which is probably still the best for solo XP. Then you can do like LOD darts. And then there's also Mundunugu. That being said, Mundunugu did get a buff with the Manitou rune. And it's going to feel a lot better, especially in like T16, these kind of things. And also on like the lower end of like, for example, GR90 blasting, where you gear up really fast. This will definitely help. So the buff definitely will be felt there if you play Mundunugu. The other builds are simply way too slow for like GR90s. Let's get into the T16 and bounty ranking. So the number 1 class by far here is the Monk. Inner Raiment in particular actually got a buff this patch and was already the best build for this purpose. So now there's really no contest anymore. There's Wave of Light as well if you prefer that, but Inner Raiment is really the build here. It's strong enough to just destroy everything in T16, even in groups. So this is the bounty build of all time, and it will remain so even more. On the other hand, we have probably by far the worst class, Necromancers. They have LD Mages and Bone Spear. I mean, you can do anything in T16, but those are noticeably slower and more clunky to play than something like this here, in my opinion. And you have all the other classes in between. So I just listed like the best builds that I would recommend for T16 or bounty farming for each of the classes. I don't think there's really that much to say here. If you're like a really try-hard or sweaty T16 or bounty farmer, you should definitely make the Monk. But other than that, I mean, every class kind of works. You have decent builds. I just don't really think that Necromancer is like on the same level as the other classes here. We just don't really have like the T16 build. For the quality of life and difficulty ranking, that was a little bit difficult to do because sometimes you have a lot of different builds and some of them are extremely difficult to play and some are super easy to play. So I'll try to give it like some overall like class ranking with a few notes here. So for example, Barb, the top builds, for example, in groups you have the Z-Barb and in solo push you have the Raker. Those are very difficult to play, depending on what you're doing exactly. And on top of this, you have stuff like the Band of Might timer, so you have to pay attention to that. But outside of that, if you just want to like play a Barb on your own and farm, for example, with Frenzy or Whirlwind, those are really simple builds. You know, you charge around, you whirl around, or you hit a little bit and everything dies. So these builds in particular here, they are really smooth and easy. You don't really have to worry about anything. But at least for the like kind of like the top end, it gets difficult. So this is why they have a C. For the Crusader, they get a D here. So main issues is the toughness. Basically every single Crusader build is very squishy. The big guy with the big shield is has like no toughness in this game. The cooldowns, especially Akkurat's champion, you have to pay attention to your COEs. For example, when you play Heaven's Fury, these kind of things. Even if you play some of the off-meta stuff like Hammerden, for example, it's clunky and you have to pay attention to a lot of things. So yeah, Crusaders have very low quality of life here. That being said, Fist of the Heavens is the exception in my opinion. So if you are looking for a smooth T16 build, Fist of Heavens is there. It doesn't have the auto cast anymore from season 27, but it's still a nice smooth build for that purpose. And it's also really nice to just, you know, blast through GR90s in like 60 to 90 seconds or something like that. Not a very strong build, you don't get a lot of XP with it, but super nice and smooth to play. Then we have the Demon Hunter here, so I gave this an A in quality of life. So we have God, we have UE, these are all like really simple, easy to play builds. There's a support Demon Hunter. Again, this is like, if you are a noob in group play, then support Demon Hunter is your role. And other than that, there's only really like 2 builds that are relatively hard to play on a Demon Hunter right now, which is Marauder, which is most likely getting replaced as the top dog anyway by Natalia. And Natalia probably is gonna be easier than Marauder, in my opinion. But again, that remains to be seen. So these are the only 2 things we need to worry about. Other than that, the class in general doesn't have like any clunky mechanics and these kind of things. So Demon Hunter should be very comfy. Then we have the Monk. I give it a B. So mostly because the top build, Wave of Light, is hard to play and gear. But outside of that, everything on the Monk is also pretty chill and pretty easy. There's Inner, there's POJ, really like, you know, spin to win, hold down one button kind of build. So nothing really to worry about. Without the Wave of Light being so strong, I would give Monk actually an S here. Then we have the Necro. So Necro doesn't really have like crazy difficult builds this time around. I guess the hardest one probably is something like Z Necro. But outside of that, like Nova is like really noob friendly. So literally stand there and channel. The only thing you have to do is timing your COEs and you know, nuking in the right moment. So this is about it for what you have to do. But yeah, this is like this kind of like class mechanic with Crispin and COE and bone armor dislocation. So as long as you get that down, if you are like a Necro veteran, you're gonna have no issues with that. But some builds are also a bit squishy. That doesn't apply to Nova, which is Omega tanky. But maybe Rafa, for example, if you're playing an RGK. Z Necro is also not really the tankiest in a group. So these kind of things. So it gets a B for me. Then we have Witch Doctor. Witch Doctor is overall, and always has been really like the most difficult class to play effectively, in my opinion. So while the builds are relatively powerful, for example, I mentioned here the Zuni and these kind of things, it always requires a lot of effort. So you need to have the good timing, you need to time your Grave Injustice with your Spirit Walk, you need to position yourself. A lot of builds are very mechanically complicated, especially Mundunugu, for example. So there's all these kind of things here on the Witch Doctor that I think makes it deserve a D, and that is also not really changing. That being said, a few patches ago there was an update to the Lacumba Bracer that makes Witch Doctor overall a lot more tanky, because pretty much every build has that bracer. So at least the toughness is not really such an issue anymore, compared to in the past, if you haven't played Witch Doctor recently. And finally we have the Wizard. So Wizard has relatively easy, smooth builds. So Meteor is fine, Hydra is fine, so they're not like anything crazy. I gave it a B because of Karini. It's always something to watch out for. It can sometimes randomly drop in the middle of the run and you just get one shot. You have the shield mechanics. There is no UI shield indicator in the game yet in 2023. So this is obviously a bit scuffed. But outside of that, if you are comfortable with Wizard in general with those 2 things, you're going to have no issues. Let's get into the group viability. So we have 3 group classes in particular that will dictate the meta, and then a 4th one a little bit here with the Wizard. So we have Barbs, obviously, with support Barb. Unfortunately, Frenzy doesn't really make the cut as a Rift Guardian killer. You can play it, you know, in like a more casual group, and you can kill even 150 bosses, but it's not really on the level of Rathma or LOD Spiders. So I want to mention that, but C-Barb obviously is really, really strong. Then we have Crusaders that are just out. We have Demon Hunters. Natalia might be good enough to actually be like some kind of form and meta, but again, this remains to be seen. We have not played it yet. And I guess it will be very hard to beat something like Nova. It will most likely not be like a real RGK, but you can also do some kind of like, you know, off-meta Natalia combos, maybe even some speedruns of it. We'll see. That being said, we have the God speeds. So God got buffed. It's almost on the level of Rats. So there is apparently like a slight difference, but I think for most people that are really fed up with Rats, Gods is a really good option. So I want to put that here. And we have obviously the Z Demon Hunter. And with this new Natalia buff, there might actually be a change to the Z Demon Hunter build, and you include this pulling effect from the spike traps into the ZDH. And that could potentially completely outclass the Z Barb. But again, this is untested and we'll see on the patch day. The other S tier class here is Necro. So you have rats to get started in the season, to gear up super fast, get your paragons, get your gems, etc. Then you have Nova, the trash killer of the season again. We have Rathma, basically the RGK of the season again. And we have Z Necro. So you have like all the roles, literally everything you can think of. So Necro is also like, if you want to play in groups, Necro or DH will guarantee you a spot. And then the Z-Barb as well. A bit harder to do, but it's also there. I also want to talk about the wizards here. So they got an A. So Meteor is really powerful, and we're likely to see some Meteor wizards also pop up on the Foreman rankings. You can also play Meteor speedruns on a rather high tier, similar to how it goes in solo. You can go like higher tiers than others and a bit slower. And we can even expect 150 speedruns at some point with Meteor, like 1 or 2 Meteor wizards. That being said, you have to be careful, especially on a season start when the servers are packed. You can lag out quite easily in large pools, especially when you have 2 wizards, and especially when you are still quite weak. So this will get better and better as the season progresses, because more and more people like drop out from the game, and you also get stronger and stronger. So it kind of like reaches the point where it doesn't matter anymore. But at least in the first week or so, you're going to be very careful, for example, nuke on convention cycles in a large pool and these kind of things. So keep that in mind when you play wizards. Yeah, and lastly, we have the Monk and the Witch Doctors. They are not really included in any meta. I gave Monk a D because, yeah, you can still do some off-meta stuff relatively effectively with Z-Monk and Wave of Light. So these are not really like the group builds right now, but not terrible. And then we have Witch Doctors, which have a C. I was thinking about maybe giving a B even. So we will definitely see Witch Doctors, especially LD Spiders, as Rift Guarding killers. I think with the season theme dropping out for Rathma from season 27, LOD Spiders will be a noticeably better Rift Guarding killer for pushing. And people will just like destroy Rift Guardians with that. But on the other hand, the power level is so high that this might not be needed, and people might just go with the Rathma anyway. But from the way it looks like, LOD Spiders is the best Rift Guarding killer in the game, and it can kill at least around 75% of the bosses faster than anything else. But if you get some of those ad bosses, in particular Hamelin and Zaxtrus, you're gonna have trouble with this. And this is why it's not really such a very smooth like farming option if you're trying to do like 150 speeds all the time or something like that. But on lower tiers, you can kill any boss really fast. And finally, here we have the build diversity ranking. So this is again a little bit like gut feeling. I was just talking about the like most of the top builds here, and obviously like there's a lot more builds than what I have in this list. So if you really want to push, you know, like all the sets on every class and these kind of things, then there's a lot of build diversity on everything. But here I'm talking about, you know, the stuff that you actually want to use if you want to stay efficient. So Demon Hunter gets an S here, and so does the Necromancer. I already mentioned this here, especially in groups, you have like a lot of different roles, a lot of different builds. You can, you know, switch for any role that is needed for the team. So that is really nice. Kind of similar on the DH here, especially because of the solo farming as well. It seems like all of these builds here will end up very similar in terms of efficiency. So you can play the God, you can play Marauder, you can play UE, and maybe Natalia. And yeah, there's a lot of things to choose from on Demon Hunter. So if you're tired of one build, you can just switch to the other and you keep going. Then we have 3 classes that have at least some kind of variety. So this is Barb, Monk, and Witch Doctor. So I talked about those builds. Raker and Frenzy, really strong farming options. 4016, you can also throw in Whirlwind here. You have the Z-Barb. So there's a bunch of things here that all make sense to play on the Barb. Here's the Monk. So this also gets a B from me because there's 3 really strong options for solo farming. While Wave of Light is a bit ahead of the rest, especially until you have that geared up. They should be fairly even with POJ, for example, and there's also Inner if you like this like smooth water speed farming, you can play that. You have the Inner Raymond, etc. So this is overall pretty fine. And we have the Witch Doctor also with a B in build diversity. So again, you have various pretty strong solo push options. You have Sunday 16 options, You have the Spider as RGK, so there's quite a lot of things here. And lastly, we have the Wizards and the Crusaders here. So Wizards got a C. I was kind of tempted to give it an F because it's like Meteor or Bust. And Meteor is simply way stronger than everything else. But outside of that, almost all the other Wizard builds are actually fairly close. So if you disregard Meteor, there is Hydra, there is Veer, there is Twister, there is Frozen Orb, there's a lot of stuff. And if you don't want to play like the top Meteor build or you want to push a few of the other builds, you can definitely do that, and they're all fairly solid. But if you want to be effective, it's basically just Meteor. And it's kind of similar on the Crusader, so it gets a D here. We have 2 push builds with Arcan and Heaven's Fury, but both of them are really clunky and unfun in my opinion, and these kind of things. And we have like 1 really strong farming option, and that's it. So yeah, they get a D here in the build diversity. And that also concludes my ranking here. So I went really in depth in a lot of these different categories, but I think it's important to have a bit of background, a bit of context of why I made the ranking the way it is, why I gave these letters. And also, for example, if you just look at a list of builds and you see like best to worst or something like that, it doesn't always paint a full picture. So I tried to go into that as much as I could. If you still have any questions about why certain classes are ranked the way they are, and I didn't explain it enough, then feel free to ask away in the comments, or if you completely disagree with a choice here, let me know. Maybe there's something I missed. Obviously, there are a lot of builds in this game, and I tried to put this all together in this sheet here the best I could. Hope you enjoyed this video, and see you guys next time.